Hey y'all, what's up? My name is Angela. Let's talk about the books that I read in the month of March. The first book that I read was Honey Girl by Morgan Rogers. While on a girls' trip to Las Vegas, our main character Grace gets drunk married to a woman she's never met before. This throws a wrench in her meticulously planned life, and under the stresses of her responsibilities, Grace escapes to New York to spend a summer with her new wife. This was a really powerful and startlingly relatable story about a woman who's just trying to reconnect with herself and what she really wants from her life. I really enjoyed seeing the diversity of the different characters in this book, and I also enjoyed following Grace on her own journey through improving her mental health. I've seen a lot of people say this in their reviews, and I 100% agree. I really felt very romanced by this book, even though the romance between Grace and her wife Yuki was a pretty minimal part of the plot. Overall, I really enjoyed reading Honey Girl, and I gave it 4 stars. The next 3 books I read for my video were ATEEZ's album Picks My TBR, so I'll have that linked in the cards. If you enjoy K-pop or if you enjoy YA books, I'd highly recommend checking out that video. The next book I read was The Dark Descent of Elizabeth Frankenstein by Kiersten White. At a young age, our main character Elizabeth is taken in by the Frankenstein family to be a companion to their loner son Victor. This book follows their history, the development of their codependent relationship, and shows just how far these two will go to keep the people that they love alive. So this seemed to be a more modern take on a gothic style of novel. It's a spin on the original Frankenstein, not exactly a retelling. This book has such a slow start with a lot of setup, and then the second half just kind of like snowballs out of control. And I've seen that a lot of people say that this is a critique of the book, but I honestly didn't mind how dramatic the ending was. It was just very unbelievable and kind of comes out of nowhere. The one thing I didn't really enjoy was jumping back and forth between the past and the present, because there's so much backstory for Elizabeth and Victor's relationship that I almost feel a more linear storytelling method would have been more effective at building the importance and the intensity of their relationship. I gave this book 3 stars. The next book I read was The Selection by Kiera Cass. Set in a future United States, our main character America is picked along with 34 other girls to take part in the selection, which is a process for the prince of their country to pick a wife and a future queen. Though this process would be extremely beneficial for both America and her family, she's reluctant to participate because she's already in love and in a relationship with another boy. If you're interested in YA, I'm sure you've come across this book at some point. I didn't know a lot about the selection before going into it, so I actually thought it was more of like a YA dystopian, but this first book at least is straight up just a teenage version of The Bachelor, like the TV show. There's a large focus on the dates, the prince's interaction with the other girls, the girls appearing on broadcast, or the contestants kind of starting beef with each other. I think this book is like a good nostalgic YA. It's really entertaining, but objectively, I don't think it's that great. I'm gonna give you this book 2 stars. The next book I read was We Contain Multitudes by Sarah Henstra. This book follows 2 high school teens, Jonathan and Adam, who form a relationship through a letter exchange English assignment. This book is so conflicting to me because there's a lot to love and a lot to not. Starting with the parts that I love, the writing is just so beautiful, really eloquent, simplistic, but also really emotional. I think the discussions that the characters have about poetry and music and how those affect, their personal lives was just so engaging. However, there were some events that happened to create tension in the plot that were completely unnecessary and seemed to be added in just to add on to the pain and angst of the characters. And the characters don't even really end up growing from those really painful experiences. These events don't really get resolved between the characters, and everyone just seems to kind of move on past it. I think what that ends up creating is very messy characterizations through the end of the book, and to me, both the plot and the characters kind of fall apart. For those reasons, I ended up giving the book 3 stars. The next book I read was The Uninhabitable Earth by David Wallace Wells. This is a nonfiction that details the different effects that climate change will have on Earth in the next century. This book had a lot of really powerful information, and it was all very alarming. I think this book was really eye-opening because it takes a look at climate change from a more global scale, and it kind of puts into historical context just how condensed all of these very recent large-scale natural disasters have been compared to the history of life on Earth. Even though this book was really informative, it was quite a dry nonfiction, very well researched, but also very dry, so I would recommend picking up the audiobook. I gave this book 4 stars. The next book I read was Love is for Losers by Vipka Brugman. This book follows Phoebe, an apathetic teenager who is struggling through the stresses of school, a distant parental figure, and friends who seem to be more interested in relationships than friendships. Phoebe is completely over the idea of love until she meets Emma, a new girl who's working at her aunt's thrift shop. This book was really lighthearted, very reminiscent of the style of The Princess Diaries by Meg Cabot. Even though the characters are in high school, I did feel that the voice of the characters was quite young, almost like they were in middle school. So it was quite jarring to read about these characters discussing very explicit topics with the mindset that they seem like they're in middle school. I definitely recommend this book to the younger side of YA, not middle grade, but I think if you're like a freshman in high school, this is like a good age range for that. Overall, this was a really fun and entertaining book, and I thought it was a great queer YA romance. I gave it 4 stars. The next book I read was Milk Fed by Melissa Broder. This book follows Rachel, whose eating disorder dictates every part of her life. She decides to go on a detox from all the harmful influences in her life, as suggested by her therapist, when she meets a woman named Miriam, who seems to be her antithesis in every single way. I absolutely love this genre of fiction, but I just don't know what to call it. It's like women being shockingly honest through beautiful metaphorical stream of consciousness writing. If you liked My Year of Rest and Relaxation by Otessa Moshfegh, or if you like anything by Mona Awad, I think you'll definitely like this book. This book really dives into each layer of our main character's eating disorder in a very raw and visceral way. I think that this book does a really good job of kind of dissecting our main character's disconnect from her religion, as well as her desire for connection with other humans. This kind of conflict between her emotions is a really jarring part of the book. I gave this book 5 stars. The next book I read was Every Last Fear by Alex Finlay. This book is about the Pine family, who is found dead on vacation and are survived by their 2 sons. Danny Pine is in prison for murdering his high school girlfriend, and Matt Pine is just trying to be an average university student. Though on the surface this seems like a really tragic accident, evidence starts coming up that suggests that there might be something darker and more purposeful at hand. This is a suspenseful true crime mystery that really dives deep into the effects that true crime media has on the families and the victims of the crime. I don't really think there was an especially strong critique on the effects of media on true crime, but I think it does give a different perspective for fans of true crime media who might see their documentaries as more fiction than horrific crimes that are tied to real people. The plot of this book wasn't super groundbreaking, but what I really enjoyed was taking all the evidence from the different perspectives and putting it together to get the bigger picture. I gave this book 4 stars. The next book I read was Bad Feminist by Roxane Gay. These are essays from the author about her takes on feminism, why she sometimes labels herself as a quote-unquote bad feminist, and how feminism is portrayed in literature and media. This is my second book of essays from Roxane Gay, and I just love the way she writes. I think she does a great job of combining these very personal experiences with these larger insights on social issues like sexism, racism, sexuality. And I really like how often she brings in examples from all sorts of media to really give different perspectives on the issue she's talking about. With this book in particular, I was really taken aback several times in the book with the points that she was making, and I think she really challenges the readers to reflect on their own views on intersectionality. I gave this book 5 stars. The next 3 books I read were for my video where I test the recommendations from book blurbs, so I'll also have that linked in the cards. The next book is The Black Flamingo by Dean Atta. This book follows our main character Michael from a young age as he comes to terms with his sexuality, his identity, and how it all culminates in him discovering drag. I think this was a great book that condenses a lot of nuanced themes about race and sexuality into a really compact book. I really like that for Michael, drag isn't described as a persona to hide behind, but rather an extension of himself. This book ends on a really inspirational note for the readers, and I think that it really solidifies the message that we should all be walking away from this book with. I gave this book 4 stars. The next book I read was Dangerous Alliance, an Austentatious Romance by Jenica Cohen. In order to save her family estate from falling into the wrong hands, our main character Vicky must quickly find a suitor for marriage. But with no really good choices, very little time, and someone who seems to be after Vicky's life, her courtship turns into a very dangerous process. I wasn't a huge fan of this book. I found it kind of boring and infuriating. Our main character Vicky is almost written as purposefully ignorant and naive to kind of drag out the plot. I also didn't like how domestic abuse plays a huge part in the plot, but the characters seem very ambivalent or somewhat unsympathetic to the trauma that the character in the relationship had to go through. I found all of Vicky's suitors to be hella annoying, and the romance was really tepid for me. I ended up giving this book 2 stars. And the last book I read was If We Were Villains by M.L. Rio. In this book, the lines between acting and reality become blurred for a close-knit group of university actors, and when a murder happens too close to home, the relationship starts falling apart. This was absolutely some dark academia goodness. It was so good, really great for people who like Shakespeare as well. This book definitely convinced me to get back on the dark academia bandwagon. I would recommend this to anyone who didn't really like the secret history but is really interested in the dark academia vibe. I think the author does a really great job of quickly establishing the character dynamics and fleshing out these characters to seem like real people. The open-ended conclusion really tore my heart out. I was scrolling through theories about the conclusion for like a good 20 minutes after finishing the book, and I think it was just really fitting for the plot. Everything about this book really worked for me. I gave this book 4 stars. And those were the books I read in the month of March. Be sure to let me know some of your favorites that you read this month in the comments down below. If you enjoyed this video, please click like, and if you want to see more, click subscribe, and I'll see you all next time.